In old age, when visiting your siblings and having a meal together, you will realize three truths. Hello and welcome, everyone. Today, I'd like to share a heartfelt reflection on growing older, particularly focusing on what happens when you decide to visit your siblings for a simple meal. When you grow old, you gradually realize that everything you once took for granted, your health, your energy, the presence of loved ones, begins to shift in ways you never quite anticipated. Each new ache in the morning, each shift in routine, reminds you that time is carrying you forward, whether you are ready or not. You might think about your childhood home, the familiar laughter in the hallways, the little squabbles over who got the biggest slice of pie. Perhaps your siblings and you would gather around a worn wooden table on a Sunday afternoon, ready to dig into a homemade meal. In your mind's eye, it may still look and sound the same. The warmth of the kitchen, the playful teasing, and the sense that you are in it together no matter what. Yet, one day you find yourself in the later chapter of life. You decide to pay a visit to one of your siblings, have a simple dinner in their home, and see how everyone is doing. And in that one meal, just a couple of hours of conversation, you discover three profound truths about growing old, family ties, and what it truly means to face the final stretch of life. In this reflective stage, it becomes clear that everyone's hair has turned gray, or perhaps it's gone altogether. Old photo albums might still show you and your siblings as vibrant young people, running across the front yard, wearing mischievous smiles. But when you arrive at your brother's or sister's doorstep today, you notice your joints ache more than you'd like to admit. Your steps are slower. That sparkle of youth you once saw in their eyes has faded into a softer gaze shaped by many decades of real-world experience. The meal you have together might be nothing fancy, perhaps a pot roast, a salad, or just a comforting bowl of soup. Yet the significance of that meal is enormous. You finally see that life has taken each sibling down different roads, molded different priorities, and eroded certain dreams you once all shared. There is something sobering in looking at the people you grew up with, and realizing they have changed in ways you never truly accounted for. First and foremost, you discover that happiness in your twilight years often feels more fragile than you could have anticipated. It's not that happiness is impossible. In fact, many older adults find tremendous joy in simple things. A good cup of coffee at sunrise, a leisurely conversation on the porch with an old friend, or simply watching their grandchildren play in the yard. However, the illusions of a permanently blissful retirement often give way to the reality that storms can appear at any time. You might witness your siblings going through their own health challenges. Perhaps your eldest sister has trouble walking, or your younger brother struggles with consistent migraines. In other words, all the bravado from your youth, that unshakable belief that "I'll handle it when I get there," starts to face the grim practicality of bodies that wear out, resources that might be limited, and time that doesn't stand still. One man I once knew, Mr. Anderson, spent his entire career working for the state government. His pension, while modest, gave him a sense of security. He imagined that he could glide through retirement, spend a little time at his cabin in the countryside, and enjoy regular get-togethers with his siblings. But his older sister, Harriet, who lived in a small Midwestern town, had never saved much at all. She had worked various part-time jobs, raised 3 children, and never had the luxury of long-term financial planning. When they reached their late 60s, Harriet found herself struggling with medical bills she hadn't foreseen. Mr. Anderson would make the long drive every couple of months to visit her. In the early years of her retirement, Harriet seemed cheerful enough. Yet one time he arrived at her house, hoping for a nice weekend together, and discovered that she had been skipping important medical treatments because she couldn't afford them. The house had a musty smell, and Harriet looked pale, obviously feeling unwell. That day, Mr. Anderson ended up cooking for her, cleaning the kitchen, and reminding her to take her medication. It was far from the pleasant sibling dinner he had imagined. He broke down in tears later that night, realizing that while Harriet had appeared to be doing just fine, the truth was far darker. She was facing her final years in discomfort and uncertainty. This leads us directly to the second truth. Old misunderstandings and resentments rarely vanish just because everyone is older. Sometimes, people say that time heals all wounds, but they fail to mention that time can also deepen them if they go unaddressed. When you are young, there is often a sense of fresh optimism. You believe that one day you will resolve any issues with your siblings, or they might spontaneously forgive you for that argument or that slight you caused. But as the decades roll on, you might find that old fractures are never truly repaired. They're just temporarily covered by layers of politeness and the occasional holiday gathering. A man named David learned this the hard way. Growing up in a household of 5 children, he was the baby of the family. His older siblings doted on him when he was small. They would slip him extra candy, protect him from the neighborhood bullies, and share their hand-me-down clothes. It felt like a cozy cocoon of support. But as soon as the older siblings each got married and began forming their own homes, that tight-knit unity started to unravel. Life got complicated. There were mortgages to pay, in-laws to manage, and personal dreams to fulfill. When their parents became ill, the responsibility of care fell mostly on the shoulders of the siblings who lived closest. David, who had moved to a different state for work, tried to contribute financially, thinking that would be enough. He figured his money could help cover the medical bills, and he trusted that his older siblings would be able to handle the hands-on caregiving. The tension soared when their father lost mobility and needed round-the-clock attention. Over time, his siblings started resenting David. They felt they were left with the most exhausting tasks: bathing their father, lifting him in and out of a wheelchair, and enduring sleepless nights whenever he needed help. Meanwhile, David believed he was doing his part by sending a monthly check. He wasn't callously ignoring them. He was just caught up in his own job demands, his own children's needs, and the challenges of living far away. One day, when he traveled back home unexpectedly, he discovered that his father had been moved to a small, run-down annex on the property. The siblings would drop off meals at the door, but there was little emotional warmth left in the caregiving. Shocked and devastated, David confronted them. Angry words were exchanged, old resentments flared, and that sense of childhood closeness evaporated in one heated confrontation. For years afterward, even after both parents had passed, David and his siblings remained at a distance. When his eldest brother was on his deathbed, he asked to see David, hoping for some last-minute reconciliation. But David arrived with a heavy heart, feeling that too much water had passed under the bridge. Though he tried to let go of his bitterness, the scars ran deep. Such stories underline how, when you grow older and gather at a sibling's home for a meal, it can become alarmingly clear that the bonds you assumed unbreakable might be frayed or even completely severed. Outside appearances can be deceiving. From the outside, a family may appear to get along just fine. Smiles at get-togethers, polite chit-chat at reunions, but only those inside truly know the complicated layers of regret, anger, guilt, and disappointment that might lie beneath. If any of those old tensions remain unsettled by the time you hit your 60s or 70s, they rarely go away on their own. Sometimes the best you can hope for is a measure of cordiality, a few shared moments of kindness. Truly mending those rifts often requires direct conversation. empathy, and a willingness to rebuild trust, something that can be terrifying to undertake when you've spent years or decades silently nursing your wounds. Finally, the third truth emerges, often with a harsh clarity. The long-held assumption that you raise children so that they will take care of you in your old age is mostly a romantic ideal. It's not that children never step up for their parents. Some certainly do, devoting time, energy, and resources to ensuring their older loved ones have comfort and dignity. Yet, people who rely entirely on the notion that my kids will handle everything once I can't might find themselves in a rude awakening when the reality sets in. Modern life is chaotic. Your adult children may be juggling careers, raising their own families, and possibly living hours or states away. Even those with the best intentions might struggle to provide the level of care and attention you'd need. Consider Mr. Thompson, a retired grocery store manager in his early 70s. Over the course of his life, he had 6 children. He and his wife worked tirelessly, often denying themselves luxuries so their kids could join sports teams, go on school trips, wear decent clothes, and eventually head off to college. He assumed that after all those years of hard work, his retirement would be surrounded by loving help from his adult children. But then his wife passed away suddenly, and the question of who would watch over him came up. His eldest and youngest both lived in different parts of the country, working in high-pressure corporate jobs. Another son was in the Air Force, stationed thousands of miles away. 3 daughters lived somewhat closer, but they had their own families. He discovered that not one of his 6 children felt fully equipped to have him move in permanently. They all politely passed the responsibility around or suggested he consider an assisted living facility. Hurt and disillusioned, Mr. Thompson realized that no matter how much love they shared, his children had their own complicated lives. He eventually decided to take a different approach. He asked each child to contribute a small monthly sum, and he used that collective amount to hire a part-time helper who would check on him, take him to appointments, and assist with errands. Meanwhile, Mr. Thompson resolved to take care of his health. He joined a local senior fitness class, learned simple recipes to maintain a decent diet, and made an effort to keep his mind sharp by reading and engaging in community activities. In doing so, he found a sense of freedom and a surprising degree of joy. He was no longer caught in the false hope that his children owed him the type of 24/7 presence he may have unconsciously expected. Instead, by managing his finances wisely and guarding his health, he discovered that the final stretch of life could be peaceful on his own terms. These realizations about the fragile nature of happiness in old age, the lingering power of old resentments, and the necessity of relying on oneself can feel unsettling at first. After all, we grow up with so many assumptions that we'll remain strong, that family will always be there, and that old arguments will fade away with time. Yet, once you actually step across your sibling's threshold for that long-overdue visit, you start seeing the subtle cracks in those assumptions. You notice that your sister might be polite, but a bit distant, still harboring feelings about an incident that happened 30 years ago. Your brother might be obviously burdened by his own financial troubles, unable to spend much time or energy attending to your needs. Perhaps everyone is cordial, but you sense a weight in the room that wasn't there when you were kids. However, recognizing these truths does not have to fill you with despair. Paradoxically, it can be a moment of awakening, a chance to reshape your expectations. If you can accept that total happiness is ephemeral, you can learn to appreciate the smaller joys without fretting about whether they will last. You can savor that simple meal with your siblings, the humble casserole, the fresh salad, or even a store-bought pizza, and be grateful for what you do have. You can learn to set more realistic standards for how your relationships should look in your later years. Instead of yearning for perfection, you might allow for forgiveness where possible, acknowledging that you and your siblings have each traveled long, winding roads, complete with triumphs and heartbreaks. If old resentments have not fully dissolved, you can at least attempt to prevent new ones from taking root. That may mean having a gentle conversation, admitting your own shortcomings, or even deciding that while you cannot fix the past, you will no longer perpetuate the cycle of bitterness. Sometimes it's a single heartfelt talk, an apology, an acknowledgement of how things should have been handled differently, that shifts a long-standing dynamic. Or maybe you discover it's too late to truly rebuild those bridges. In that case, you can focus on finding closure within yourself, releasing the grudge so it doesn't cast a shadow over your own sense of peace. And when it comes to your children, or the younger generation in general, letting go of those perfect fantasies can liberate you to find solutions that actually work. You can plan more carefully for your healthcare costs or talk to a financial advisor if needed. You can explore community resources, everything from senior clubs to social groups that help older adults maintain an active lifestyle. Relying on yourself does not mean abandoning your children or shutting them out. It simply means recognizing that they might not be able to offer all the support you want. You can still cherish the time you spend with them, the love they share, without pinning all your hopes for comfort and well-being on their shoulders. It's a balancing act, acknowledging life's uncertainties while holding on to the moments of warmth and connection. When you realize that your adult son might only be able to drive in for a weekend visit once every few months, or that your daughter's job keeps her traveling half the year, you can focus on what you do have. Maybe a phone call every Sunday, a quick note or text to see how the grandchildren are doing. You stop expecting them to drop everything. In this acceptance, you find a gentler understanding of how generational ties evolve over time. Moreover, being honest with yourself about these realities can lead to a newfound appreciation of community and friendship in old age. You may find solace and companionship in neighbors who are going through the same stage of life. It could be as simple as sharing morning walks, gardening tips, or a card game on Tuesday nights. You could join a local choir or a volunteer group. The point is that while family relationships remain profoundly significant, they are not your only avenue for connection. By diversifying your social circle, you fill your days with purpose and curiosity, rather than waiting by the phone for a call that may or may not come. And if your siblings are still around, despite whatever friction the years have caused, perhaps that single meal in their home can become a space to share memories. Maybe you recall that summer fishing trip when you all got sunburned, or the time you tried to surprise Mom and Dad with a homemade cake that turned into an amusing disaster. Nostalgia, handled with care, can rekindle laughter and remind you of a deeper bond, even if life has built certain barriers. That said, it's also valid to recognize if the family dynamic has become unworkable. You might come away from that meal thinking, "I did my best to reconnect, but it's clear that we're on separate paths now." Acceptance of that fact can be less painful than forcing a relationship that has lost its foundation. So, what can one do with all of this new clarity? For one, you can start by taking responsibility for your own well-being. Be mindful of what you eat, how you exercise, and how often you seek medical checkups. There's a common belief among many older folks that it's somehow weak to talk openly about health challenges or mental burdens. But the opposite is true. The more proactive you are, the greater your autonomy remains. Arrange your finances in a way that leaves as little ambiguity as possible. Whether you need to modify your home to make it safer or consider the possibility of living in a place better suited to senior needs, like a smaller single-story house, preparation is an act of self-love. Next, you can practice letting go of grudges. This is not to say you simply forget the hurt. Sometimes emotional wounds cut too deeply to vanish, but carrying them into every interaction can weigh you down more than you realize. If you cannot find a path to forgive, at least find a path to release the constant replay of anger, the cyclical blame. That internal shift can set you free, making the latter years of your life calmer and more harmonious. On top of that, consider fostering a social environment that includes the people you genuinely connect with. Siblings are often the first friends we have, but they aren't necessarily the only friends. Attend local events at libraries, join adult education classes, and maybe sign up for a local crafts club or a hiking group tailored to seniors. The point is to recognize that fulfillment in old age can come from many directions, not solely from the nuclear or extended family. If you ever feel a pang of regret or loneliness, know that you're not alone. Plenty of older adults discover that old illusions about family unity and easy retirement bliss don't match reality. That doesn't have to be tragic. In fact, facing these truths can open doors to healthier, more honest interactions. It can encourage you to become an example of resilience and acceptance for younger generations, showing them that life doesn't end at retirement. It merely shifts to a stage that requires different resources and different kinds of emotional strength. In the end, whether you're enjoying that meal in your sibling's home or hosting them in yours, being aware of these three truths can help you find peace. That complete happiness in old age is often more nuanced than you believed. That old resentments don't magically vanish, but can still be eased with honest effort. And that you cannot rely entirely on the idea that your children will do everything for you. You realize that the final piece of the puzzle is your own self-reliance, financially, emotionally, and spiritually. You become aware that your inner resilience may be your greatest ally. All of this might sound daunting, but it's a shared journey. For every story of heartbreak, there is a story of a family that made it work, despite the odds. For each sibling group torn apart by old arguments, there are others who let bygones be bygones and found a way to share the joys and burdens of aging. Nothing is written in stone, and sometimes even a small shift in perspective can mend relationships or at least allow for more compassion. Perhaps the greatest gift of growing older is wisdom, the ability to see beyond momentary conflicts and to treasure the people who remain in your life, flaws and all. So, if you are approaching that time, or are already in it, why not take a step back and reflect on where you stand with your siblings, your children, and your own expectations? Could you reach out today, invite them over, or accept an invitation to share a meal? Could you talk about how you're truly feeling in a calm and open way? Could you start planning the rest of your life in a manner that prioritizes emotional stability, mental health, and perhaps a dose of fun? These are not easy questions, but opening that door is part of the process. And now, to you, yes, you're reading or listening. How have these truths manifested in your life? Have you found that visiting family in your senior years has brought you closer, or has it revealed rifts you didn't know were there? Have you discovered ways to maintain your independence while still feeling connected? Has forgiveness been part of your journey, or do you still struggle with the weight of past grievances? Sharing these experiences can be powerful and healing, not just for you, but for anyone who hears your story and realizes they're not alone. Ultimately, the message is that life in your golden years is not meant to be endured in isolation or under the delusion that your past relationships will magically remain frozen in time. Rather, it's an ongoing process of adaptation, acceptance, and sometimes sorrow. Yet within that sorrow lie hope and liberation, because you can finally see life as it is, no longer overshadowed by illusions. Embrace that clarity. Make peace where you can. And don't forget to savor the small, precious moments that still grace your days. The warmth of a sunset, the laughter of a grandchild, the aroma of a homemade casserole, or simply a quiet afternoon reading by the window. These moments, however fleeting, might very well be the essence of what makes living worthwhile, even as your hair grays and your step slows. So, if you do get a chance, the next time you sit down at a sibling's table, don't just fill your plate. Open your heart. Look around. Notice the lines on their faces, the little gestures that show their age, and the unspoken worries behind their eyes. Then recognize that they are doing the same with you, whether they admit it or not. In that mutual understanding, maybe, just maybe, you will uncover a glimpse of genuine connection. You will see that you're all traveling this road of life together, each with your own baggage, triumphs, and regrets, and that the time that remains can still be meaningful if you allow it to be. Feel free to share your own stories. Talk about them with others who might be listening or reading. Let the conversation continue, because through honest discussion, we often find that we're more alike than different. And in the final count, recognizing and accepting these three truths about aging, particularly when you visit your siblings for a meal, might just be the key to finding solace, understanding, and perhaps a touch more compassion for yourself, your loved ones, and the life you've lived.